But first, if you suspect your power bills are rising because government policies pulling in different directions at the same time, well, you'd be dead right. And here are two instances today in the news. First, it's reported that the New South Wales government, as I said, is in discussions with the power giant Origin to keep open the country's biggest coal-fired power station beyond its current planned closure date of August next year. We are, of course, talking about the Narrabri power station in the Hunter Valley. And such is the reality of how unreliable renewables are to a 24/7 modern economy like ours, that the Minns government's forced to do this even though Labor is committed to a 50% emissions cut by 2030. And the second problem today is yet another example of lawfare getting in the way of development. In this case, the federal court has just placed further obstacles in the way of gas giant Santos and stopping them opening their Narrabri gas field, which is of course in New South Wales, because the Native Title Tribunal supposedly failed to consider the climate impact of this project, even though gas is roughly half the emissions of coal. Now, is it any wonder that energy policy is a slow-motion train wreck? Prices have been skyrocketing, that widespread blackouts are now a real risk or reality if you live in Victoria, and that heavy industry is moving overseas to places that don't have our emissions obsession. Just think what's been happening over the past decade or so. Instead of being run to produce affordable and reliable electricity, our power system's been run to reduce emissions. There's been billions and billions spent in massive government and consumer subsidies for wind and solar power that only gives us electricity when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining, which has therefore, of course, destroyed the economics of gas and coal-fired power that we desperately need to keep the lights on. So now, because we need power 24/7, governments are being mugged by reality and are forced to subsidise coal-fired power stations to keep them operating. The same coal, of course, that they demonise day in, day out. There's the still secret subsidies in Victoria. Subsidies are given to the coal-fired power stations in the Latrobe Valley to keep open the state's aluminium smelters. There's the temporary subsidy to coal producers that the federal government's also giving to artificially deflate power prices to consumers. And soon there'll be a further Victorian government-style secret subsidy that the Minns government in New South Wales will pay to Narrabri to avoid widespread blackouts in coming summers. In other words, we're subsidising renewables to reduce emissions, and as a result, we've made coal and gas uneconomical, so now we're forced to subsidise them too just to keep the lights on, even though that means higher emissions. Now, wouldn't it always have been less crazy to have avoided subsidies in the first place and to have just let the power companies upgrade their coal-fired power stations in the normal course of business that would have eventually reduced emissions by some 40% because newer coal-fired power stations are more efficient, cleaner and lower emitting than old ones. Now, all of this was common sense. It was the sort of arguments that were made back at the time, but rejected by Labor and all the climate zealots in Canberra. And not just those on the green left side of politics either. Plenty of mad greenie moderates inside the Liberals as well. If reducing emissions really was the key objective here, we'd already have nuclear power under consideration, because it is today the only way to generate baseload power 24/7 that's entirely emissions-free. But those same whackers that want to ban coal and gas also want to keep the ban on nuclear, which is why we're in this costly and confused mess. Even the usually smart Labor MP Andrew Charlton was brought in to try and run down nuclear.
The truth is that the market has made its decision about nuclear energy. It knows that nuclear energy is by far the most costly type of new energy that we could add into the grid, and that's why it's not part of the government's plan.
Yeah, come on, Dr. Charlton, you are far better than that. It is total BS that the market's made its decision on nuclear. There is no market on nuclear power in this country because it's banned. And it's banned because your government has banned it and is keeping it banned. So don't insult our intelligence by just reciting some stupid talking points that a staffer handed you before you sat in front of the camera. But beyond nuclear, we don't even have other sensible options. We've got the activists holding sway. Like this federal court decision today, where activists have used native title rules to sabotage fossil fuel projects, even ones like gas, that would actually get emissions down. Now, my theory in all of this is that very powerful players have invested heavily in renewables, so that they don't want any other option explored because, follow the money, it would cripple their investments. Now, to my mind, this has never been about the planet. It's always been about the first mover advantage. They picked wind and solar, invested heavily, creamed off all the subsidies, and now don't want anything else on the table, even if it's better like nuclear, to reduce their profits. Finally, though, at least the coalition seems to be moving towards a rational energy policy. The sad news is that's still at least an election away.